Dear Rumsfeld Fellows, dear CAMCA network members, distinguished guests of the CAMCA Forum, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Tamuna Kekenadze, Rumsfeld Fellow from Georgia and CAMCA network member and the Managing Director of CAMCA Forum. I'm very excited and privileged to welcome you, all of you, today to the 7th Regional CAMCA Forum in Washington, D.C. I'm especially delighted to welcome you in person because we have not met for 3 years. So this is a very special moment for all of us. Now, let me introduce and welcome the main organizers and the hosts of the forum. Please welcome Dr. Svante Cornell, Director, Central Asia and Caucasus Institute.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure today, on behalf of the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute, to welcome you to the first CAMCA DC conference, the 7th CAMCA perhaps, but it's the first in Washington, and we're happy to have you here. And we're happy to be here with our partners from the Rumsfeld Foundation and, of course, yourselves, the CAMCA network. I'm standing here only because you're waiting for Professor Starr, who will give you a keynote speech in a moment. But I'll just say a few words about this amazing program, not least because we have so much time has passed since this began, and we have people here and outside who are maybe not aware of everything that's happening. The first thing, of course, I want to do is to repeat what was just said, and namely that it's been 3 years. We have not seen you. We've missed you. We're happy you're all here, and we look forward to not having any gaps in our programs like we've had for the past several years. So the first question for outsiders is, what is CAMCA? Not a lot of people know about the fact that CAMCA is a new emerging world region. So the idea of CAMCA, of course, as members of the network will know, is that instead of looking at your countries, 10 countries, as the appendix to something, you know, as an appendix to looking at Russia or China or the Middle East or Europe or anything, it's about putting a focus on these countries that together in many ways form a region. But where did CAMCA come from? So CAMCA started, if I remember correctly, by a discussion between Secretary Rumsfeld and Professor Starr more than 15 years ago. Secretary Rumsfeld had recently left government and set up his foundation. And from his time as Secretary of Defense after 9/11, he was fascinated by the region that you all come from, and also how little it was connected to America, and especially the young emerging leaders of this region who you embody. And jointly they came up with the idea of the Rumsfeld Fellowship Program to remedy this. Now, of course, the fellowship itself, I think Professor Starr suggested a fellowship, not least because the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute had long had a fellowship program on a smaller scale, not at all at the scale at which we're witnessing here. But members of that fellowship program have taken very serious positions. I only just saw this morning in the news about Maulen Ashimbayev, who's now the Speaker of the Senate of Kazakhstan, who was one of our fellows at the Institute even before the Rumsfeld Fellowship Program was started. That's just one example. The Rumsfeld Fellowship was, of course, initially intended to increase contacts between young leaders in the CAMCA region with the United States. But after a while, it became clear that maybe even more important than that, the fellowship program was connecting rising leaders in the region itself with one another, something that was not really happening because, as you know, this part of the world is one of the least, or was one of the least connected regions, if you will. But that, of course, thanks in part to in great deal to your work, that is changing already. So the fellowship created a region-wide grouping in government and business as well as in the analytic world. And this, of course, led to reunion meetings. Many of you were in Batumi, the first reunion. Some of you came to the program later, and we're grateful for that. And these discussions were so interesting that the fellows decided that this should be opened up to a greater audience and interact with the broader, both political, business, analytic community. And it has grown ever since. We've had conferences in Astana, in Ulaanbaatar, Tbilisi, Dushanbe, Baku, Tashkent. And much has changed since we started the program, of course. First, the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute moved. We've been now in 5 years already with the American Foreign Policy Council on Capitol Hill. The network has grown to almost 250 people today. Sadly, of course, third, Secretary Rumsfeld passed away, and we will honor him later today. And of course, finally, the world has become even messier than it was when we started this program, and I'm sure there will be many opportunities to discuss that and the implications for CAMCA region and its relationship with the United States today and tomorrow. Most importantly, of course, we're also here to reconnect with each other, and that's very important. To many, it's the first trip since the pandemic. For most of us, we're not used to interacting with this amount of people in one place and in one time, but I'm at least looking forward to it. I will not extend this any longer. I just want to say that none of this would have been possible without the tireless work of our friends who have been doing the real work and organizing this. Of course, at the Rumsfeld Foundation, foremost, Sarah, Bridget, and Evelyn, and of course the director of the fellowship program at the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute, David Zumbadze. With that, I'd like to wish you a happy forum, and I'll hand back the floor to Tamar. Thank you.
Now join me to welcome Victoria Clarke, President of the Board, the Rumsfeld Foundation.
Thanks, everybody. It is great to be here, and it is great to see so many people here. Apologies from Steve Cambone, who got caught up in some terrible travel issues, and he won't be joining us. But hats off myself also, Sarah, and the small but mighty team that makes so much happen. We are coming up on about 1 year since Secretary Rumsfeld passed, and it's very sad, but it's also a good time for us to reflect on what he cared about as far as this group is concerned. He would be so happy to see so many of you here. He was always enormously respectful of people's time and their work and what it took to get to these events, and he would be so happy to see so many of you here. So thank you for making the effort and taking the time out of your lives to be here. A few thoughts. I'm trying to channel my inner Rumsfeld, which can be a scary thing, but something Sarah and I have talked about a lot. He loved young people. He loved young people who would get engaged in their governments, in their businesses, and wanted to do better. And I'm sure if he were here, he'd be slapping me on the back or grabbing Sarah and saying, look at them, look at the talent, look at what these people would be doing. He would be so proud of what some of the fellows have gone on to do. So that's one thing. There will be a session a little bit later honoring him, but I know a couple of points that I think will be so important to him about the fellows and this group. And Dr. Starr, I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder, something we were talking about earlier this morning. Secretary Rumsfeld really believed that the United States should be more engaged in the region, but he also firmly believed that it had to be a respectful relationship and that the real strength and the vitality and the important things would come from you and come from your countries and come from the region. So his strong desire and force and direction with this group was the role of the Rumsfeld Foundation, to help facilitate but not do. He wanted the power, the strength, the vitality to come from all of you, and it's become that. It's become this organic group that lives and thrives and grows on its own. I wasn't in some of the sessions yesterday, but I heard that it was wonderful, and I heard that the connections, despite the 3-year absence, this group getting together, was phenomenal. He would be thrilled with that. And I'll say one thing, and this is stealing one of the things I think Dr. Starr is going to talk about. Secretary Rumsfeld always wanted this group to be very helpful, but he didn't want it to do everything. So don't wait for us. We're always open. Sarah and the team are always incredibly receptive and open to ideas, suggestions, requests, but don't wait for us. And don't wait for us to do the incredible things that we know you all can do. So with that, I will just say thank you very, very much on behalf of the Foundation for being here. Hope you have a terrific few days and look forward to some of the fascinating conversations. Thanks very much.
Last but not least, please welcome Shoaib Rahim, chairperson of the CAMCA Network Board.
Good morning, and welcome to the CAMCA Forum 2022. We are here to celebrate our regional identity, the CAMCA identity. What does that mean for the participants of this forum? It means getting to meet a network which is composed of a group of highly qualified individuals from all walks of life: business, NGOs, think tanks, security, thought leaders, and intellectuals. Among our group of fellows, whom I call friends, we have current and former ambassadors, cabinet ministers, deputy ministers, mayors, entrepreneurs, and people who are movers and shakers in their own field and in their own country. We continuously engage with each other throughout the year to find synergies, and we gather once a year with the relevant people and decision makers in the region to try and discuss what matters to us, what matters to the region, and what matters to the world. We are in Washington, D.C. for the first time to make a statement that we, CAMCA, are more relevant and central to global affairs than ever before. The biggest and most recent testament of this impact is the unfortunate US failure in Afghanistan. The poor judgment and irresponsible decisions of a select few in the White House and those they supported in Kabul resulted in the collapse of a nascent democracy and the subjugation of 35 million people by the Taliban. This poorly executed withdrawal has changed the calculus, not only in CAMCA, but also set the stage for great power rivalries. No matter how much some would like to deny, but the war in Ukraine is undeniably linked with the failure in Afghanistan. A brief on my home country. America has a moral obligation towards Afghanistan and its people. The Taliban represent an extremist ideology based on violence, ethno-fascism, and gender apartheid. Our people's fight and struggle against them started in the 90s and continues today in our cities and our villages. People under the strictest economic hardship are fighting through civic engagement, protests, as well as armed defense of their homes. This is especially the case in northeastern part of the country, in Panjshir, Andarab, and Takhar. Whether anybody wants to hear this or not, this is not just our fight. This is everyone's fight. And fortunately, the people of the United States have shown the moral fortitude to recognize this when the establishment failed to do so. CAMCA represents 10 member nations, each of whom are relevant to the geopolitical and economic matters of the world. I invite you all to engage them, hear them speak throughout this forum, and get to know the future leadership of the region. Thank you.
Now, I have especially been honored to have an opportunity to introduce the person who does not need any introduction, the person we at the CAMCA Network love and cherish dearly, Dr. Frederick Starr, chairman of the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute. Please, Dr. Starr, join us.
I'm being careful. Good morning. I want to speak about three developments of huge importance. One, thank you, we've just heard about initially, Afghanistan. Second, Ukraine. And third, I learned last night that members of CAMCA have been extraordinarily productive in terms of children. I'm absolutely amazed at so I'm not worried about the future of CAMCA. You're going to multiply. The question I raise to you is, well, when will the first CAMCA grandchild appear? It's not going to be long, ladies and gentlemen. So on to the first issue. Yes, Afghanistan really is important, but I want to speak about it specifically in terms of collateral damage. The collateral damage from the decision that was taken by the American president is enormous, and it is above all across the CAMCA region. It is in Central Asia, it is in the Caucasus, it is even in Mongolia. It has an impact. So I want to speak about this briefly. And that is that the heart of the issue for this entire region is geographical. The punishment that all your countries receive because they're distant from the sea is immeasurable. There is no region on earth that suffers more from what you might call a distance tariff. Why? Well, look at the great empires. Every one of them had connections with the sea. Even India. My goodness, the Indian-Arab trade, and so India-China trade. All the Western European powers, including Denmark, England, you name it, they all had sea connection. Spain, there wouldn't be a Spanish America, or for that matter, Portuguese America, without the sea. And your region is punished by nature for being distant from the sea, and sorry, airlines don't make up for the difference. So the question is, how do you reconnect to the sea? And this is not a technical economic question. It is that, of course, but it's much more. It is a fundamental question of geopolitics. It is a fundamental question of survival, of sovereignty, of self-determination. Without that access, you're always going to be living in a room with a very low ceiling. You can't stand up straight. So the question of blocking access to the sea, which is the Afghan question, is of paramount importance. This should not be on the list number 7 of various other laudable objectives in Western or world strategies. No, it should be right at the top and in the center. That's urgently important. It's important for all of you to make this point and to understand it and communicate it to your own governments and to people you deal with here and in the West generally. Now, why? Because having the access to the sea opens Central Asia, the Caucasus, Mongolia, it opens them to Pakistan, India, and all Southeast Asia. So this concept of balance in foreign policy, which Mr. Tokayev invented in a book this thick that no one has read, this idea of a balanced foreign policy becomes impossible if one of the key elements of the balance isn't there, and that is all of the South. And those of you with whom I've been in touch over the years know that I've been trying to make the point, this is a historic reality. It is our century, past century, which deviated from it. The Silk Road was not a Silk Road to China. Above all, it was a road to India, the Indian subcontinent. That's where the trade really went for the longest period of time. The greatest amount of trade, the greatest amount of cultural interaction was always with India, with the South, and that means Pakistan too today. So this is an important issue, and it seems to me that our job should be to promote that, the reopening, to break the isolation, break the geographical liability that the entire region suffers from. Now, there was a lot happening on the eve of the departure from Afghanistan. There was a lot going on this, and hats off to the Central Asians and Caucasus. All the roads, it goes back to Tapi, dating all the way back 25 years now, that Turkmenistan has pursued very single-mindedly, and on the eve of the departure, they were moving very fast on several things, including the construction of plants to transform gas from Turkmenistan into fertilizer at 5 points where there are pumping stations across Afghanistan. This was all in the works. And that was just one of many. There's of course, the lapis lazuli corridor, which would connect the Caucasus. It would connect Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, by a western route into Afghanistan and then on south. And then there was the Uzbek Railroad. There's the Tajik and American bridge over the Panch. There's the Chinese road from Badakhshan coming all the way down to that bridge. There's Casa 1000. Look at this project. This was totally all the analytic work had been done, all the contracts had been let, they were ready to go, stopped, killed. Now, all of this is suspended, it's a more accurate term. The geopolitical considerations of this, I want to stress, are enormous. Now, let me turn to the question of Ukraine. We're dealing here with something like Stalin's invasion of Finland in 1939, which didn't go so well, you may recall. It's been brutal. It's going to leave a demographic legacy in Ukraine that could be devastating. We're talking about a third of the population being destroyed or displaced out of the country. I mean, this is on a scale that no one has adequately appreciated. And what are we dealing with? We're dealing with 1991 still. We all celebrated the end of the USSR and the appearance of new sovereignties. We did it, we were too soon. We didn't realize that, in fact, the Soviet system didn't collapse in 91. What it did do was elements of it collapsed that created space, especially in the economy, for various people to do various things that we know about, a lot of it positive. And that, yes, that's true. But what it didn't do was transform the most important area, and that is the psychology. And there were these islands within Russia that were unaffected by 91 and viewed it as a challenge. And they've been working very steadily ever since, and I have to say, successfully. And hats off to them for that. Let me recall for you an interview that maybe some of you saw. I was sent it by a Russian friend. It was on Russian national TV. It was of Volodya Putin was being interviewed by a very respected television figure in Moscow. And the man was very polite, deferential, and he'd just been out in the countryside and visited a number of provincial towns. And give them credit, they've done a wonderful job of rebuilding a number of the major cities in the country, not the secondary or tertiary ones. So he comes and he says to Putin, he says, look, I've been all over the country. I have to say, things look pretty good. You've done a lot of good reconstruction and so on. Is it now possible, because of this success, to talk about a greater degree of decentralization and self-government? Putin absolutely froze. You can see it on the TV. He absolutely froze and said, wait, Do you understand that I am dealing with 2,000 units? Where he came up with this figure. 2,000 units, all of which want greater decentralization and they want self-government. He said, if I were to allow this, he said to the now flabbergasted reporter, if I were to allow this, he said, do you know what would happen? He said, most of them want out. This is Putin. This is not Navalny or some crazy person sitting in one of your countries or here. This is Putin. He said they want out. He said if that were to happen, he said Russia would be reduced to the size it was under Muscovy when it was smaller than Japan. This is Putin himself. He showed his hand at this point. He showed his cards. This is, we have to understand, this is the pakmel, the hangover that has never been dispelled. Okay. Now, the question is this. What are the options at this point? What's likely to happen? Well, let us consider several hypotheses. One is that Putin wins, that he gets as much territory as he needs virtually to destroy Ukraine. The trouble with this is that if he wins, he loses, inevitably. This is why, because if you conquer territory, especially there's going to be guerrilla fighting, and even more important, you're going to have to do something for this devastated land, or else everyone is going to continue the fighting indefinitely. And that he cannot provide that. If he provides that, people in Russia start to complain because their economy is going to tank too. And they're going to say, where's mine? So if he wins, he loses. This is not a hypothesis. This is an inescapable reality. If the Ukrainians succeed in confirming their sovereignty over whatever territory they want and accept, that, of course, changes everything too. Now, none of these hypotheses about events in Ukraine assume the continuity of Vladimir Putin. It seems to me inconceivable that he would be able to continue to exercise power. He may stay in office, but to exercise power after this. He is absolutely crippled domestically and especially internationally. This is a fact. Now, at that point, what happens? Again, you can develop obvious hypotheses, and you can then evaluate these as time goes on. One would be that those really tough generals who think that he made a mistake at the beginning by not officially calling it a war, that they will seize power, they will take control, whether with him or without him, and really start doing everything necessary, however brutal and savage. Well, you can say that's already happening. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that some other force just holds on, some middle force that doesn't quite do this and doesn't quite do that. Still a third is that some really reform currents suddenly emerge. It's not excluded, it's quite possible. One has to consider all of these. And the fourth that you have to consider is that the current borders and territorial definition of the Russian Federation break down. This is not some absurdity or weird hypothesis. Putin himself was acknowledging the importance of it. Who in Central Asia, who in the Caucasus, who in Mongolia is thinking about this? Who in Washington is? Who in Brussels? Who anywhere is really thinking about this? But you have to. And to fail to do so is to possibly miss a tremendous opportunity or to leave yourself open to absolutely tremendous damage. Now, so what do we do in the face of Ukraine today and Afghanistan today? The issue is obviously Taliban. And as of today, no one's recognizing them. However, 32 countries, as you know, have extended a kind of fake recognition in the form of receiving senior people from Taliban Kabul who are given the title chargé d'affaires. And they are, in fact, functioning as ambassadors in 32 countries. This is a reality today. Now, most of those countries are absolutely waiting before they extend recognition, and they're looking at issues of human rights and so forth, that whole agenda, as they should be. And of course, the West is doing that. Now, let's assume, therefore, that the key to this is what the Taliban themselves are able or are unable to do. That will be determinant. However, this does leave open an important question, and that is, can Central Asia, the Caucasus, Mongolia, CAMCA countries, under these circumstances, advance their top strategic priority, which is open that window? Can they do that under the present circumstances? They think they can. Your governments think they can, and there's been a lot going on this. It's really buzzing right now. And what is at stake is, of course, they recognize that this is the key to their sovereignty and independence. So it's being pushed in a lot of places, and every country is doing it. You have the discussions between Turkmenistan and the Taliban regarding TAPI. Very concrete today. The Turkmen have named Mr. Çalık, a Turkish citizen who well-known and well-regarded in Ashgabat, given him complete control to open up to expand TAPI to include an electric line across to Pakistan. The Pakistanis are eager to get that. So that's moving forward. The development of ports on the Caspian continues, and those feed into all the routes across Afghanistan. The Uzbeks have been particularly active. They are indeed proposing to continue the development of the railroad system through Central Asia, south to Afghanistan, and is evidence that this isn't some conspiracy against China and Russia. The routes through Afghanistan eventually and most directly go to either the Pakistani-built port at Gwadar or the Indian-Russian-built port at Chabahar. So this is not some anti-Russia Chinese conspiracy. This is just looking after your own interests, which is laudable and commendable and essential. So this is moving very fast. The Uzbeks are planning, I understand, a major conference later in July, at which they expect to have all the senior Taliban people there. And I know they're pressing them to come clean, say, what are you really going to be doing? We'll see what happens. Everyone's waiting. Who knows where this will go? All I wish to say is that this is the top strategic interest concern of the entire region. If you're sitting in Georgia, rest assured, this is going to affect you. It's going to affect you in Baku. It's going to affect you in Ulaanbaatar, because this is going to be the key not only to surviving, but one can imagine if this window of trade and communication and interaction and cultural interchange is opened, one could really soberly imagine a great flourishing of economies, life, culture, intellectual life across the region. Why? Because no longer will you be living under a ceiling that is too low. You are today, and that hasn't changed since 1991. To use a very frightening reference, you remember Genghis Aitmatos's very chilling story of the Mancourt, how this destroys the mind and transforms the personality. Well, opening this window, restoring what existed for 2,000 years, giving all of this region an alternative so that it can balance its major foreign connections, Russia, China, East Asia, Europe, America, so it can balance these in a constructive way. If that happens, then the Mancourt, whatever that was on the skull, will be removed. Finally, the last traces of it will be removed. It won't be removed until that happens. Thank you very much.